Great pleasure to welcome you all to the barn on Axel's Magic Farm here in Le Lot, where we've been invited in the context of the Antidote Art Fair to put together an exhibition here. I was asked by Blaise Anquet to curate and came up with an idea of the American refugees in France. For many centuries even, Americans have been seeking refuge in France for economic or cultural reasons. You can think of any number of famous Americans and not so famous who have found a very pleasant place to live and work and feel appreciated here in France. I know that's certainly my case, and I hope the case of my fellow American refugees here at the barn. I'm going to introduce you to our writer-in-residence, Jason Stoneking. So follow me in. Jason's here writing on his bale of hay. Jason writes in situ, which I knew and invited him to come down to work here during the opening hours of the space. And we, Jason largely, put together this installation where his work is on display around him and he's busy writing. He writes by hand, and I'll let him explain more about his work.
So what I'm here doing is I'm writing a what I call a bespoke book, which is these are small books that I make by hand, and then I fill them with handwritten words in a single draft. And the idea is that I am able to document my feelings as they arise, my reactions as they arise in a particular setting or situation, and so it makes for a great short-term residency project, because I can go through something and go through the thoughts that are inspired by this specific space and situation, and record them in a way that shows visually that I haven't taken them away and refined them and edited them and made them in another place. So this is work that's made in this place for the people that are here for this event. And at our closing event, our finissage, I'm going to read this book live. I should be finishing it the day after tomorrow. I only have 2 pages left.
So let's walk around, Jason. Let's take a look. This is Diana Quinby's work. There are 5 large drawings of hers. It's all graphite pencil work. So the details are quite extraordinary. The overall effect is, pretty much exactly what I was looking for under these circumstances. We have her drawings, which are often self-portraits, and I know that Jason's had some time here, and I'm just curious, Jason, staring at these, have you had any thoughts?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Diana has a very unique style, both in terms of composition and her use of materials. But I think what really strikes me the most, and particularly in some of these self-portraits down here towards the end, something I find very powerful about Diana's work is her use of her own perspective on her body, and we cannot mistake these views for the gaze of another, or even for the sort of internalized idea of the gaze of another. This is very much an artist who's looking at her own human form from a perspective that she could only see herself. So looking down along her body, or in some cases with the use of a mirror, getting a view of her body that nobody else could ever have. And I think that says, for me, something very powerful about taking ownership of her gaze, and so that we know that the mystery we're exploring is her private investigation of her form, and in some cases the form of her partner and members of her family. But we know that we're in an intimate space, and I find that very compelling about her work.
I think that's quite true, and I would just add that as marvelous as her technique is, and as almost crazily impossible it is. This is obviously, these are very, for me, very psychological images. We get a very powerful feeling of the person behind these images. As much as they're portraits and exteriorized, they are very powerful. Here we have 4 large paintings by Rachel Isadora. I chose them because of the colors and the motion. Rachel, you should know, is a former dancer, classical dancer, danced with any number of celebrated, dance companies, and her pieces are very involved in motion and bodies. Some mythological details. This is Leda and the swan. Many of you probably know the myth. And dancers, bodies, if we can come in close, we'll look at those. Midsummer Night's Dream, Bottom's Dream here. Very striking work, and I imagine that Jason, having contemplated this, these efforts of Rachel's for almost 2 weeks now, probably has noticed something.
Well, it's very engaging work because on the one hand, like Rich pointed out, we have these characters from theater, from mythology, narrative structures that have been interlaced in these images. But at the same time, they're also sort of floating in this soup of what I perceive to be almost like an externalization of the subconscious. It's like a dreamscape where we have these color palettes that on the one hand are quite playful and light and easy on the eye. We have these limes and pinks that almost take me to like a Rococo springtime type place. And then at the same time, they plunge into these very dark spaces and very murky colors. And it makes me feel like I'm watching Rachel's mind assimilate these characters and these stories from myth and from narrative history into her own sort of subconscious soup. And I feel like I'm looking into a dream that's trying to make sense of a lot of different stories.
Here we have Andrew Christman, who's got a silk screening technique, nylon, I guess. And he silk screens on it. We have his trees, and basically he's made us our flags, which we have one floating out in front, and we think of them as our American refugee flags. They're related to early American revolutionary flags that were flown in the United States before it was the United States, as we were liberating ourselves from the King of England. Andrew has a thing about trees, and specifically dead trees, that are still present. And something very much like that in Andrew's work, the sense of a past which is still very much present. And I think that that's partially what he's given us in our flags, the realization and the certainty that we are a part of history.
So one of the things that Andrew brought up in describing his work is the appeal to heaven, which is a phrase that he attributes to a quote from John Locke, talking about the plight of the pre-revolutionary colonists in America who had rebellions against their European rulers. And to briefly paraphrase Locke's quote, he says, when we don't have an appeal on earth and we don't have the liberty to appeal to redress our grievances on earth, that we must resort to an appeal to heaven. And the appeal to heaven is a phrase that Andrew associates with these flags. And I think one thing that I love about them, and Andrew Christman himself would be very quick to point out, that these types of flags have been made and used by many groups on opposing sides of various conflicts over the centuries. So they're not necessarily married to any particular ideology, but what they do ask us to think about is our own personal rebellion and interpretation of rebellion. And something that for me brings that home is that the screen printing itself is kind of a language of DIY art. You know, it's something that I grew up thinking about as, you know, the way punks make their T-shirts. You know, it's something that's accessible to everyone at the level of individual rebellion, and a flag that any of us could imagine waving in appeal to heaven on behalf of our own cause, whatever that cause might be.
This imposing, gorgeous, almost monumental flow of canvas and paint and wire is by Leslie McAllister, and as well as it functions as a piece in and of itself here in the barn, it was the decor for a performance that she gave at Les Voûtes in the 13th in Paris to celebrate the release of her new album of music and poetry. Jason, you know Leslie and you know her work.
From a technical or formal perspective, I think the thing that really strikes me the most about Leslie's work is that she's developed this technique of working with an unstretched, supple canvas, and she puts a thick wire in the edges of the canvas, glues it into all the edges, which allows her to, as you can see in the surface here, shape the canvas and sort of sculpt it to her whims each time she installs it, which appeals to me because of my interest in the site specific. So every time that she installs this work, she can flow the shape of it in a way that reacts to the space and expresses, you know, what she's going through with her feelings about the work.
And let me just interject, that's exactly right. And watching the installation, I was impressed with how that flow was developed in situ here by Leslie as she was hanging it.
Yeah, it's almost like a private performance. You know, her moment of installation is the moment where the work is
a privileged little moment for your curator and friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what's depicted in the abstraction, the way I see it, is Leslie's internal psychological forest. She calls this the Spatium Forest, this piece, which is a reference to the title of her sound art album. And you can hear the elements of her sound work playing from behind the piece. And I think for Leslie, the relationship between the sounds she hears in her head and the abstract imagery that's floating in the space where she's sort of dissecting and reproducing those sounds is part of what's represented by the colors and the shape of the work. And so to see it sort of spill out into this enormous space, you know, it feels like a sort of explosion of a psychology that maybe Leslie keeps more discreet in her day-to-day life, which for me is a very powerful thing to see.
So we arrive to moi-même. And I'm going to say very little, and I'll let Jason articulate whatever he has in mind.
The writer in me is first drawn to the language component of this work, and the double, or I would even say triple entendre of the phrases. For example, the whole you could have left, the whole you might have left. Not only is there the double entendre between whole with and without the W, but there are also a few ways to read the phrase might have left. You know, the whole you might have remaining, the whole you might have left behind, the whole, you know, there's a few ways of deconstructing that phrase. And in a way, the language being able to be read in multiple ways also sort of echoes these images, which play a game of positive and negative space. I think the black and white highlights the fact that you don't know whether what you're looking at is what's been placed there or what's been taken away, which is what the text is dealing with also. And I think it was Nietzsche that said the thing about you look into the abyss long enough and the abyss looks back into you. So one of my favorite things about these images is while you're contemplating all those different ways of deciphering the text component and the positivity and negativity, you're also seeing yourself as I am now reflected in the form, in the shape. And so
The mirror.
so you're implicated directly in the work, and the work is looking back into you as you look into it, and then suddenly you're left with the question of whether you are the positive or negative space to the work, and whether you have left or have been left with this whole. And I love the philosophical gamesmanship of that. You know, it's something that we can really interact with.
I think that's a fine description of the work. I just point out that the clouds, which are fiberglass, sanded fiberglass, and are hanging from the upper beams here, are sort of negative holes, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
I call them the clouds. Someone who saw them in my studio in Paris, hanging from the ceiling below the skylights, said that they look like the ghost of art. Which I liked.
That's a great line.
This is Alison Grace Koehler's work, and she's a stained glass artist who works in pieces of glass that she has written on or drawn on sometimes. She's a performer too. I think it should be stated clearly that she works with stained glass on a light table, sometimes with projections and with poetry and with music of her own creation. So she gives us a unique and full performance of the act of putting pieces of glass and light together to make an object to inspire us.
Alison's one of my favorite artists, and something I really admire about her work is the innovation of the technique she employs. So in stained glass, traditionally the glass is held together by strips of lead, but the lead is not variable in its thickness, and so stained glass artists are obligated to sort of draw and cut pieces of glass in advance to conform to a specific amount of space that's going to exist between each piece. And Alison, not wanting to be confined by this problem, uses a copper foil technique that's common to Tiffany
Lamps.
objects, for example, lampshades, exactly. And what the copper foil technique that she uses does is it allows her to vary the thickness of the space between the pieces of glass, and sometimes to even leave spaces between the pieces. And the reason this is important is because Alison likes to work with recuperated pieces of glass. And so some of these pieces of glass have been, found, broken,
right.
repurposed, and so she's able to work with those pieces without having to cut them to a specific form because of this copper foil technique. And that's important to Alison's work because I think, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I get the feeling very much from her work that she has placed herself on the bridge between happenstance and harmony, and very much enjoys the idea of taking things that appear to be broken, disused, out of step, out of harmony with their reality, and reassembling them into new harmonies that help them participate in what she's feeling with regard to the light and the music and the objects. And so she's really found a whole formal approach that has to do with philosophically what she's expressing in the work.
Thanks for joining us in our virtual visit of the Magic Barn on Axel's Magic Farm. Thank you, Antidote. Thank you, Blaise Anquet. Thank you, artists.
And thank you, Richard Dailey, our esteemed curator, for inviting us to participate in this show. It's been a real pleasure.
See you next year.